This morning we have the first of two distinguished industry panels. This morning's panel is composed of cyber leaders focused on the defense market. Their backgrounds cover a broad range of cyberspace activities and are here to share their views on cyberspace. This morning's moderator is Ed Rios, President and Chief Executive Officer of Cyberspace Operations Consulting. Ed, I'll let you take over from here and do the introductions.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see so many friends and colleagues in the audience. Nothing like Cyber 2.0, the beta version. So we're going to kick it off here, and my job as moderator is essentially just to introduce our folks here and moderate your questions. Please feel free to send questions. I think they're going to put up a text number up here that you guys have seen before, so they'll pop up here and we'll go from there. I'd like to start off with just a few words first, though, give you a couple minutes of my thoughts. Then we'll introduce the panelists and allow each of those folks to spend a couple of minutes, 3 minutes or so, 2 minutes talking about their perspectives and go into the questions. The goal is to finish on time. That's what my job is, to get us out here at 11 o'clock. As long as we stay on time, happy hour will be on time. So that's what we're going to do. I'd like to start off the session, though, with an industry focus, if you will, and ask you guys just a quick question. Doctrinally, in the military, we often give a mission to an organization that has a preponderance of force and the means to command and control it. In cyber, however, things are a bit different. Who here believes that the government or the Department of Defense has preponderance of force? Yeah, we have smart dudes. Should have gone with my Big Bang Theory start instead of just me. Appreciate it very much. That's a great perspective that you all have. And I'd also like to add that as far as command and control goes, I don't think we've got that figured out yet, even in industry, except in pockets and places. But what that means is, from your awareness and the response, is there's clear recognition that industry holds a major place in cyber operations. Granted, it started in ARPA and all that activity, but through the 80s, companies like Lomas and Nettleton, a couple, three others, started moving network-to-network information to try to move financial information around, mortgage information, data sharing information to help the financial areas in the 80s, and it grew from there. Not too long after that, there were a total of 50 websites, and then we got to where we are today. A couple of interesting industry points, however, that what industry plays in cyber is not only in the way of software and networks, but in all of the architecture and infrastructure that supports it. Two common denominators, of course, electrical power and the telecommunications grid. And if you guys haven't had a chance to talk to General Vautrinot here this morning or anybody from San Antonio here lately, they had a significant power outage not too long ago. Just to go to show you what some of our centers of gravity are and how industry plays a role in this. And it's very critical to how we do cyber and move information in the United States, not only among ourselves, but for national security. If you look at industry and the role, and what some of our panelists here will talk about a little bit, we are software providers, we're hardware providers, we certainly have a lot to do with the architecture that the telecommunications runs on and how this data moves. The bottom line point to all this is in cyber, industry is a crucial player. And I think with that then comes the realization that cyber warfare is not something that's unique just to the Department of Defense or the military. Cyber warfare goes across the board, whether it's the Visa, MasterCard processing centers on the East Coast that have discretionary classified locations, if you will, and how they process and manage that information and protect the IP and the information, personal information of their customers, all the way through to what each one of us have to do as a part of the defense industrial base as we share information with the government coming back and forth. I think eventually what we're going to see is that industry will start to move more and more into cyber services, not only IT services, and we can elaborate on that for a long time if you like, particularly in different environments. But for now, I'd like to just leave it there and start turning it over to our panelists. I'm going to start here on the left, introduce our panelists, and let them speak a couple of words, and then we'll continue on down and open it up to questions. First, I'd like to introduce Ms. Tina Kuhn. Ms. Kuhn is Vice President of the Security and Information Operations Business Unit of Cyber Intelligence Division, Northrop Grumman's Information Systems Sector. She's supported the DoD throughout and is currently working in the D.C. area. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Kuhn for a few words. Tina?
Thank you very much, Ed. You know, I'd like to start talking about our cyber threats. We have over 1 million attacks on our DoD networks every day, 400 million a year. That's a huge number of threats that we have on our systems. So I'd like to make a few points on how we can manage that very fast-paced environment. We need knowledge. We need knowledge across not just our networks, but our whole entire enterprise. In order to get that knowledge, we must collaborate. We must collaborate throughout the government organizations. We must collaborate with industry. This is a U.S. problem, and we need to collaborate across all of the players in order to solve the cyber threats. So one of the mantras we have at Northrop Grumman is that we build cyber into everything that we do. Cyber is a whole enterprise problem. We need to have our users trained so they do secure practices while they're on our networks and on our systems. We need to train all of our developers and make sure our developers know how to build in security into their systems. It will cost us less and be more secure if our systems are built in with cybersecurity from the very beginning. And we need to have our cybersecurity professionals continuously be up to date on all the new tools and techniques and the environment that they are working in and protecting our nation in. And then finally, I would like to talk about innovation. Innovation is critical for our cyber security. Our country was built on innovation. It was built on out-of-the-box thinking, and we need to not give that up. That needs to stay as a core value as we go through the cyber and we go through this fiscally challenging time. We need to make sure that we keep innovation in the forefront so that we can keep the strength of our country as it has been and as I believe it should be. Thanks.
Thank you, Tina. Our next panelist is Mr. Dewey Houck. Mr. Houck is Vice President and General Manager of Information Solutions, a division of Boeing Network and Space Systems. Mr. Houck is also a Boeing Senior Technical Fellow in Boeing's Defense, Space, and Security Organization. Dewey?
Thanks, Ed. Just a few things about the environment that we're in that I think are important, maybe 5 or 6 things. First of all, the data environment is huge. The proliferation of large data sets is very significant, up from layer 3 and 4 and layer 7 on the stack. It's just amazing how much data is out there, and it's very noisy. So that's point one. Point two is that, as General Baslett talked about before, the asymmetry of the threat is very important, not just with respect to defense intel, but also to the commercial sector as well. So that's a very big deal for us. Third is the rise of mobility, that Gartner says by 2015 that 6 times more connections to the net will be made by small screen devices than large screen devices. So that tells you where we need to focus both on 802.11, 3G, 4G wireless, very important space. Fourth is commercialization of IT. When Apple changed from being a computer company to a consumer electronics company, it changed everything. Changed everything from the business model that they were dealing with to the types of devices that we have available to us at home, which in turn drives this industry as well. The last couple of things are about the competitive environment that we're in. As General Baslett talked about, $1.2 billion challenge in efficiency. So the government will become more efficient, therefore the industry partners must become more efficient and cognizant of how we do that. It's a very important deal. And then the last is how does this new business model associated with managed services affect us? That questions like multi-tenancy and on-premise, off-premise kinds of managed resources are a very significant set of questions that we're going to have to ask ourselves both as an industry and an industry-government partnership. So our view is that you got to have secure mobility, you got to have a secure infrastructure, whether that's on-premise, off-premise. You got to have secure operations because if you look at the marriage between ops and the IT infrastructure, very, very important thing. And then secure applications themselves that ride on the infrastructure and themselves in a mobile environment.
Thanks, Dewey. Our next panelist is pretty well known to all of us in the room. It's Lieutenant General Charles Kroom. General Kroom is Vice President of Cyber Security Solutions for Lockheed Martin Information Systems and Global Services. General?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. How many have been to a cybersecurity conference before? Yeah, it seems like we could go every week. And the theme seems to be, let's talk about the threat, and woe is the defender. The offense always has the advantage. And I much appreciated General Basil's presentation because I think he didn't go there this morning. He talked to the fact that government is doing things, that the military is doing things. And so in my minute and a half, I just want to say I'm pretty optimistic about the future because good things are happening across the board. Clearly, increased awareness from the CEO down to the desktop. Trust me, industry is very aware of this issue and putting resources against it. We're sharing with our peers. We compete clearly on the market, but when it comes to operating our networks, we share information in detail about the threat, about the mitigations, and we do it in real time. We are automating the mundane. We don't want government or ourselves to be spending time on updating patches or remediation configuration. We want to be focusing on the advanced persistent threat. And so you're seeing a lot of new stuff coming down with automation. We're spending R&D money, behavior analysis, intel analytics. Why? Because we're going towards an intel-driven defense. Why? Because we want to get ahead of the threat and not be reactive to it. We're starting to see the sheriff come to town, to the Wild West. Law enforcement, we're starting to see consequences to the adversary, and that's important. Policy on the Hill, legislators, our congressmen are very aware of this issue. There's lots of legislation going. They are very conversant in the issues. Now they just need to do something. Return on investment. This is an economic problem. Our corporate CEOs are putting this in their risk management plan. We're seeing insurance companies start to insure. Standards are starting to be developed. These are all positive things. Mike talked about the organization. We're all organizing. We're all increasing our schools. We're all improving our training. We're increasing our exercises. Lots of positive things going on in our future. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Our next panelist is Mr. John Jolly. Mr. Jolly is Vice President and General Manager of General Dynamics Advanced Information Systems Cyber Systems Division, providing best-in-breed systems integration, development, engineering, and support, situational awareness, digital forensics, and cyber analytics. John?
Thank you, Ed. Thanks for that introduction. I just want to touch briefly on a couple of things that the other speakers have already touched on. I really appreciate the point Charlie just made about not spending a lot of time on the threat environment at this point. The only key point that I think we need to realize is the complexity of the threat environment is changing dramatically. We talked about asymmetry, but the one trend that stands out for me that I do think is very important, I think a lot of people in this room understand, but I think many people outside this room aren't as aware of, is really the movement of the threat from the perimeter to inside the network and what that means for all of us. And from my standpoint, one of the challenges we're seeing today is what I call the shiny object phenomenon, which is vendors, companies, entities in government develop capabilities that are focused on solving a very discrete tactical problem in the cyber domain. My biggest worry is we're not all stepping back and thinking about this from an enterprise perspective. And so when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. With that regard, one of my other big concerns is just making sure that as we evolve over the next couple of years, that our customers really think about how they engage industry in thinking through these problems from an enterprise scale. So we aren't just focused on services, on delivering smart engineers, on delivering pieces of capabilities, but we're focused on thinking about solutions. One of the things that we do a lot of work in besides the defense industry is in the commercial space, and I will tell you out there, that's the approach we're taking, and it worries me sometimes when I see some of the folks in the pure commercial space taking, I think, frankly, more of an enterprise-focused approach to solutions than we do in DoD. So with that, look forward to a good discussion.
Thank you, John. Our next premier panelist is Mr. Steve Hawkins. Mr. Hawkins is Vice President of Information Security Solutions, a business unit of Raytheon Company's Intelligence and Information Systems. Mr. Hawkins has been with Raytheon and its predecessor companies since 1979. Steve?
Thanks, Ed. I wanted to, while we're here this week, we're going to hit Cyber Day, talk a lot about space throughout the week, and so I wanted to touch on the integration of the two just in introductory comments. We all know we put significant resources in the development, deployment, and operations of space systems. And they are the very infrastructure that our freedom is dependent on, our environment is dependent on, and our economy. Space is very important to all of them. And so just like any other piece of infrastructure that is vital and runs on computers and networks, we have to make it a high priority for cybersecurity. We got to bring the best people and the best technology to address it. Now these are complex systems, so it's a whole range of capabilities that have to be brought to bear to make them cyber secure. Ranges all the way from physical access, things from physical security, anti-tamper. I mean, if you think of remote down stations, those without any operators, you have to be able to handle that situation. You have to be able to work the whole anti-malware. You got to protect yourself as best you can to keep things out of your system. Of course, as John pointed out, you're not going to keep them out. There's going to be things that get through. There's the issue with the advanced persistent threat. We've got to work it. You've got to have both government and industry participants that understand how to think like an attacker, so that you can be a good defender. Because you've got to be able to find when they've gotten in your system, detect malicious behavior, reduce the dwell time, and get it out. You've got to design your systems with a resilient architecture so they can withstand someone getting into the system. Because you're not just worried about just losing secrets, you're worried about denial of service. You've got to be able to handle insider threat and cyber audit. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's a training issue. People don't know what to do. So you really have to be able to monitor and understand what you can do to make these systems secure. Information sharing. We talked about collaboration. Tina brought it up, but even the mission systems themselves have to handle a whole range of users and capabilities. If you think about it, these systems support everywhere from intel to earth science. They support everywhere from military operations to consumers. So quite a range of capabilities you have to have. And you have to be able to do this in a cost-effective manner. You have to be able to accomplish this security with appropriate staffing levels, because that's a threat itself to our national security. Now the good news is, and Charlie brought it up, I'm very optimistic too, because if you look across industry, you look across the government, we talk about how many more tens of thousands of people we need that understand cybersecurity. But what's important is we have put thousands of people in place that have been working on this problem for years now and know how to go in and do these things I talked through. I mean, all of us on the panel and many of you out there have capability in all these areas. You may not have them all, but you have some capability to offer into this. So it is really important, as we get the opportunity to design new space systems or to upgrade them, that we seize that opportunity and take advantage of it and add cybersecurity in as we go. It's always less expensive the sooner you put it in the development cycle. We don't always have that luxury. So as we create these systems and we put them in place and build that infrastructure that's more secure, we need to leverage that heavily across everything we do going forward. And I guess I'll just end up with, we all know that you can't put an infrastructure in place, you can't put a security in place, and it's going to last, because the threat is very dynamic. We won't get into it. I'm sure everybody understands that these days. But this is a continual battle. So you have to put a structure in place that's both technology, its processes, its people, its services, Ed, as you pointed out when you started this off, some sustainable measure to always keep fighting the threat. So I think that's really important, and we need to be thinking through all those issues as we convene this week to talk.
Super. Thank you very much, Steve, and thanks to all the panelists for the introductions and the kickoffs here. This panel and our discussions depend on your inputs here to text and send us information and questions on the line above. They come up on a screen here. Be happy to go through them, and some of them are already coming in. But we'll start here with our first question. Folks, do you feel there is more, less, or about the same level of clarity in this field of cyber than there was 2 years ago? Any takers on that first question? Tina?
I believe there is clearly more clarity, and I think it was said both by Charlie and Steve, we understand our systems and our networks much better than what we did even a year ago or 2 years ago. We have trained more people. We have more cyber professionals that understand the complexity of the environment. Let me just mention something that I don't think has been talked about, and that's more the full spectrum capability. We are getting smarter on that. We have tools and techniques that we can really help defend our country.
Any other takers?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at it. I think that with respect to linguistic ambiguity, I think we've got some work to do. Is a port scan really an attack? Nah, probably not. So I think that there are opportunities to improve. But I think that, just again, going back to General Basil's comments this morning, when you think about a core function lead integrator and the relationship with CIO, when you start to look at those things as being inexorably linked and not something distinct and separate, that I think that you can make a lot of progress. NGA's done a very similar thing with their reorganization, acknowledging the fact that mission and infrastructure are inexorably linked. And I think that that's extremely helpful as we move forward to gain effectiveness in looking at kinetic and non-kinetic effects and how they work together.
Yeah, and I'll just add that it is all about mission assurance, because cyber is just an aspect of that. And Dewey brought that up. It's got to all be an integrated look. How to make that work, make it work effectively, make it perform at the highest levels we need to, and just make that another aspect of the way we design systems.
I think there's more clarity about in the field than there was 2 years ago, and I think the threats are better understood. I think where we need to go as a nation is better understood. From my perspective, the biggest issue is that there are still some legal policy, public-private sharing model issues that really need to be worked out in order to get us there. So more clarity, yes, but a clear path and a clear timeline for where we need to go. I'm not convinced we're there yet. I think we all have some work to do collectively.
Yeah, certainly. Anything to add, General? All right, our next question. What obstacles do you feel keep you from serving your customer, and what needs to be done to address them?
Start on this end, Ed.
Sure.
Where are we today? We talked about we have a range of capabilities. We have an awareness. We have a commitment to address this. I think the biggest obstacle that we all have to get through, the next step, is the prioritization of how to address the problem, right? So you got to look at what infrastructure do you depend on the most from a mission perspective, kind of get it in order, because you can't do everything at once, right? So I think the largest obstacle that we all have to deal with today is just to get that prioritization as close as we can to correct and just move out.
Thanks, Steve. Any other takers?
Yeah, I would say we have a challenge in also managing and processing and gleaming the correct intelligence from the amount of data, kind of the big data issue that is a challenge that we have right now. And the amount of data that we have in our environment is an obstacle to our getting the correct intelligence at net speed.
Any other takers? Next question here from the audience. Interesting one. What are the panelists' thoughts on the definition of cyber? See who wants to take that one.
I'll take this one. I like to discourage people that I talk to on my team from using cyber as a noun. I mean, cyber as a prefix I think is relevant. Cyber space was a term coined by William Gibson in a novel called Neuromancer. So consider the fact that a science fiction guy is the origin of this. So if you want to talk about cyber surveillance or any other aspect, then I think it's important that we do that. But we do ourselves a disservice when we talk about it, in my opinion, as a noun, because it's an amorphous blob that, it can mean anything you want it to. And I think that we should strive for more clarity here.
Anyone else?
And I would just add, I think what's important is, what are you going to be best at? This is a wide problem, right? So it doesn't do any good for us to go address these same aspects of cyber. You got to decide where you can contribute, where you can offer something that is above what others have, and let that be cyber to you, and bring that forward to be part of the larger solution.
For me, cyber really at the core is what we do as entities, as companies, or as a nation to defend our networks, to attack or exploit the networks of our adversaries. It's pretty simple. It all flows from that. It's clear in the current environment that it's the noun or the acronym or the noun or the adjective is being attached to a lot of different things. But for me, it all comes back to attack, defend, and exploit.
Okay, next question from the audience, particularly with regard to IT security. What can we do to bridge the gap between need to know and right to share to better enable collaboration? Any takers?
Go ahead.
Could we maybe get a little more depth on that? I'm not quite.
Let's see. I think we had one that was pretty close.
Well, I maybe can start. Each of our industries share intrusion information with the government through the DIB. We also share that in between each other. When we discover an adversary or an intrusion that's unclassified and moves forward to the Department of Defense, who then classifies it and shares it back out with us. So in my view, much of what we could do could be less classified. We already share it amongst ourselves immediately in an unclassified manner.
Yeah, I'll echo what Charlie said. There are a lot of things that we see today, threat information that you see it on one side of the fence, it's unclassified. You see it on the other side of the fence, it's classified, and that extends not just to threat information, but also products and solutions you're seeing things being developed external to traditional DoD processes and classification system by entrepreneurial companies at a rate that is impossible for the infrastructure of the government to overcome. So from my perspective, that's a key trend we need to talk about. And clearly, if you're talking about dealing with this and coping with this as an enterprise, and you're talking about enabling situational awareness to understand the state of your enterprise, information sharing, whether it's within the government, whether it's government to private sector, whether it's within your company, or whether it's within the commercial sector, the pure commercial sector, is very, very critical to dealing with the threat.
Ed, one of the things I'll add is information sharing technology exists. It's not a technology issue. Policy-driven information technology that will allow you to share information across a broad range of security or sensitivity levels exists today. It is about developing those policies. You have to decide what information you're going to share. That's the key to making that work.
Yeah, and let me just add a little bit to what Steve said. The cloud is going to push those policies to its limit. And we need to really look at it. It is a question that needs to be in the government and industry, is how we're going to handle the cloud and the amount of data in there and share the appropriate pieces among the organizations in the enterprise.
Thanks, y'all. Next question, they're firing in here. Appreciate that. Next question is, DIBnet was mentioned by General Basla. What is industry's perspective on the future of DIBnet? Who should own DIBnet, DoD or DHS?
I'll jump in. I think that rather than talk about who should own it, if you're talking about who owns it, you're focusing on the wrong problem. So just even back to the last point, we need a network that enables information sharing. And if we talk about boundaries artificially between DoD and DHS and ownership, I think we're just going down the wrong track, and we're not going to get to where we need to get to as a nation.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. Industry doesn't care. What we're looking for is a strong leader, and we'll stand behind it and support it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we share with inside DIB and outside DIB. It doesn't matter to us.
Question kind of moving back to the policy topic a moment ago. There has been continual frustration over the last few years regarding cyber acquisition, with many initiatives to improve the process, including very recent announcements to speed up the practice. But where do you see cyber acquisition today, and what do you look forward to? Any takers?
So I'll jump in again. I don't think that the current, with respect to DoD, the current DoD 5000 process, which was frankly designed for a different era, a different type of problem, has ever lended itself well to acquisition of IT systems, and I think cyber simply falls into that category. So a lot of what you see is manifestations of that, and smart people on both sides of the fence, both in industry and in government, trying to deal with that. I think there are still a lot of challenges there in terms of how you buy capabilities rapidly, and the move, the need to be agile, the need to move with speed, the need to deal with the threat. Coming back to what I talked about earlier, I think it tends to, we tend to focus on tactical solutions, but we're not leveraging the process or thinking about how we might change the process to step back and really look at how do we bring forward enterprise solutions and how do we better engage the industrial base.
Let me just add, we're seeing IDIQs as a vehicle that are becoming more and more important and in our industry, and that allows the government to buy smaller, kind of fast-paced, do their acquisitions in bite-sized pieces, which is good. It allows more rapid getting of capabilities from industry. But the danger there is that you're not going to look at it from an enterprise-wide. We have to be really careful as you use IDIQs that you're still looking at the whole enterprise as you're putting in capabilities in these bite-sized pieces.
It really is kind of interesting because I'll just tell you, and I know all my panelists know this, from an industry perspective, there is enough business to go around, right? So all of our competitive rules and laws that do try to offer fairness into it, this is a big problem. And so I do think these agile procurement ways, I think IDIQs is the best we have today. I agree with you. I think it keeps us from taking enterprise looks sometimes and having them, but you're going to have something that moves that fast to be able to get the resources you want in your hand.
I guess I would add, the reason, and I haven't been that long out of government, you go to IDIQs is because we thought it was faster. At least at DISA, we tried to do that to avoid getting protests on large enterprise buys. And so you break it out in parts and try to hand out as many of those parts to different companies as you could. So in my view, part of the problem we do to ourselves in that we protest sometimes when the protest is not warranted. It causes the government then to have to spend an inordinate amount of time to try to get it perfect, which it never will be, so there won't be a protest. And so we've got to address that issue ourselves. Thanks.
Moving to a question that involves academia now. What is the industry and government doing to help academic institutions in shaping cybersecurity curriculums? Any participation by y'all's companies with academia that you'd like to speak of?
So I'll start. Lockheed Martin is heavily involved with more than a half a dozen universities in terms of intimately on their boards trying to help establish their curriculums. University of Maryland comes to mind immediately, which created a task force which a number of us sat on to create their curriculum, to create their cyber laboratory, to have work with industry type programs, to hire for summer help so we could bring them on and introduce them to industry standards. So there is a lot of work going on between industry and universities, and I might say even down to the high school level, where we have high schools into our laboratories, where we spend cybersecurity days giving them examples of what an intruder could do to their cell phone. All these high school kids bring their cell phones in. We can hack to them into them right while they're standing there, showing them how they can be controlled. So I think all of us sitting at this table are spending good amounts of time and money trying to bring on the education for the United States.
Tina?
Yeah, let me just add two things. One, there's an initiative by the Air Force, the Cyber Patriot. It is a high school level cyber competition. This past year, there were over 1,000 high schools that participated in this. It brings in knowledge and information about cyber to our high schools and gets them excited about having a career in cyber. It's just a mind-blowing competition of how many smart kids we have in our high schools and what they're really doing in this competition. And it is heartwarming to see the number of kids coming through our systems. That said, I think we all need to do more. We need to encourage that. We need to provide grants. We need to look at our two-year colleges, not just our four-year colleges. There's a number of two-year colleges. This year in the DoD Cybercrime Center Forensics Challenge, Anne Arundel Community College won. That's a community college in Maryland. They won one of the cyber forensics events, and we need to encourage people going into the cyber field from elementary school all the way through the continuum.
Two things I'd like to add. One is it kind of all starts with the foundation. And that foundation we found happens about middle school age for kids. And just science, technology, engineering, and math. If you look at when they're in the second or third grade, our country is #1 in the world in math skills. By the time they get to high school, we're about number 35. And it really is a motivational issue, right? So you have to, applaud all the work with the high schools, but even the foundational one with the middle schools before that is really important to develop the analytical minds that will apply to cyber and other aspects of what we're doing. I think another thing that we're doing all across industry, which I think is very good, is we're bringing in large numbers of interns as they're going through college in the cyber area. And that is the future workforce that really will make a difference. And along with that, and I do applaud our customers because they've been very open on very sensitive activities to allow us to be able to partition out unclassified type efforts that you can get these types of individuals to work on. And I think that's really important to get everyone started. So I think it's all of these things that are what's going to make a difference.
And I'd add one more thing. Just this week, our company, through NSA, is sponsoring a cyber exercise with the academies. Yeah. It happens every year. It's a really neat thing as the academies go at it through good exercise play, and go Air Force.
They are some of the best, too.
John, anything? Okay. General Kroon, this question is directed straight to you. How do you see the impact on cyber with the government budget impacts and challenges?
Well, first of all, I've been joint most of my career, so I love a downsized budget because a downsized budget forces jointness. 2, it helps set priorities, and I believe that the leadership will recognize that IT is a significant priority in processing warfighting capabilities. 3, affordability is driving integration of capabilities. That's right down our lane in IT. So I think we can have our cake and eat it too. I think we will drive affordability with enhanced IT solutions, and those enhanced IT solutions will be much stronger in terms of cybersecurity. So we will automate, we will drive people out of the equation, and we'll bring significantly greater capabilities in defending our information. No doubt in my mind. Good question.
Thanks, sir. Anybody else on the panel has some thoughts about the same question?
Says it all.
Go ahead.
No,
okay. Here's a little feedback for y'all. General Basler says consolidate for protection. Riley Repko says diversify for resilience. So the question of the panel is, which one's right, or what's the right mix?
Clearly some of each.
All right.
No, I think you have to think about the problem in from a couple different perspectives. So there's clearly areas where, in terms of hardening the infrastructure and reducing the attack surface, you want to consolidate. You want to make it more difficult for your adversaries. By the same token, continuity of operations, understanding how your networks are structured, understanding where your assets are in the network and what's going to happen if you lose something. So clearly, from my perspective, you need to do both.
We all have people that work for us. I don't care what you do, they could get into it. I don't care what you do, right? So obviously, you have to deal with the resiliency side also.
Okay. Next question from the audience here. What is the economic impact for the United States on the need to focus on cyber threats? I think what this question is really asking, there's been a lot of discussion lately about our loss of IP and other capabilities that we retain to foreign threats or attacks on our cyber systems. Thoughts?
I think that the SCAP, the Security Content Automation Protocol, has done a very good job in providing a mechanism for understanding vulnerability. What I think there needs to be is some corollary with respect to threat, going back to enemy CONOPS and doctrine and how threats might be prosecuted against us, not just a signature-based defense. I think that as we evolve our thought process, an SCAP for threat would be an excellent way to move forward in looking at the threat more holistically, just as we've looked at vulnerabilities more holistically.
Yeah, I think clearly in my mind, cybersecurity is an economic question. I mean, we just don't do it for doing sake. You've got to look at a return on investment for doing it, and what you get for a dollar more worth of cybersecurity. I mean, it's a management risk problem. And no matter how much you spend on it, you're never really going to reduce that risk to zero. So you've got to make some management decision of how to manage that gap between security and not security. I particularly like the fact today that insurance companies are now starting to get involved in providing cybersecurity insurance. Why is that? Because they look at the problem economically. When they insure your house, they're going to set your insurance policy based on a return on their investment. They're going to give you a discount for a burglar alarm. They're going to give you a discount for smoke alarms. If you're a house versus a jewelry store, your standards are going to be different. Maybe if you're a jewelry store, you're going to have a guard dog and a guard standing at the front door of the jewelry store. So here we have an industry which will be very agile and flexible in establishing standards in which they're going to insure against so that they can make a profit. And I don't think it'll get any better than that. And so I really see a change in the environment.
I would agree with Charlie that the engagement of the insurance industry is a very favorable trend. I think one of the big challenges we've had to date is that for small companies in the market, small commercial companies, not the big firms, it's very hard to sort out what the ROI for better securing your IT network is. And I think there's a robust market that's going to develop in the coming years around services for in the commercial sector that frankly is being underinvested in today because companies can't figure out how to price the risk.
I would agree with that, John. We're starting to see, despite the economy starting to nudge in a positive direction, it was really quite stagnant for a while in terms of what private industry would do to protect themselves. No, I'm not talking government contractors, but really commercial businesses. But you're starting to see quite a bit of pull of interest and asking for help across healthcare and manufacturers and the financial institutions, and because they believe it is in their economic best interest to do so. That's what will drive this. That's what drives all markets, right? That's what will drive them to become more secure. And so it will play out.
Next question from our audience. Considering that many of our vulnerabilities are in mission systems that are larger, more complex than traditional IT systems, how is industry planning, budgeting, and most importantly, contracting with government to incorporate rapid changes to the threat into a relatively slow development and deployment process? Thoughts?
I'll jump in on it. I think that is one of the key areas that you do have to overcome and you do have to address because it can be quite complex. But it's kind of what I said in opening remarks. You can put a secure infrastructure in place and it will be the best infrastructure you can put in place for one day, right? I mean, you have to set up the operational mode around it, because for those of you that have been down into the nitty-gritty of what goes on in the cyber war, I mean, you are literally coding on an hourly basis to create some kind of new defense or new approach. This is a very, very dynamic type of problem. So we do have to have the capability to not just have the products, not just do the system integration, but also have the services support in terms of being able to have a ConOps that can take that and constantly improve it against different dynamics of the attack. So it is important that you do that.
One of the things that I think all of the companies represented up here and many of our customers have gotten very good at in the last 4 to 5 years is agile software development and agile engineering, focused on how you deliver solutions and capabilities in a more timely way, whether it's to the warfighter or even into public sector. So we're all doing it, and that's candidly, from my perspective, it's maybe not that well known or well recognized, but it's making a huge difference today in many of the complex mission systems that were alluded to in question in terms of how you get capabilities to the field and to the end user faster.
Tina?
Let me just add to that. I agree completely with John about that agile development. It is a way to get capability into our systems quickly. Clearly, we have some systems that are older that did not have cyber built in from the start. We need to do that in all of our new systems that we're building now, and that agile, fast pace. Our threats and our enemies do not wait for a 5-year acquisition cycle. They are changing their threats daily, and we need to be able to respond in that rapid environment, the same as we're getting our threats.
I think that we need to seriously think about millisecond response times and how much appetite do we have for having autonomous control over restructuring policy on the fly, because the speed at which our mission systems are attacked a lot of times don't give you the luxury of responding in human time, and if you're going to respond in machine time, i.e. active defense, then how much control are we willing to give over to to autonomous components of the network? And I don't think we've really thought that through, and I think that from an IT perspective, there's not a lot of willingness to give up a lot of control to machine intelligence.
Yeah, I would add, I think there's recognition by all of us that you have a significant investment in your legacy systems. And our job is not to change out your legacy system. Our job is to help you modernize it and bring it to the future. And when you come to us, you're not looking for a PowerPoint solution. You're looking for real solutions. And most of us can provide you those real solutions that are tested in our laboratories and can show you them real time, which is what you want to see. You want to see a solution that works today on your network today. You don't want it developed a year later and then tested on your networks. You want it real, and you want it pre-tested long before you buy.
You know, you would think we certainly have the capability to hack into a system, get into spots in the system that we can't be detected in a stealthy mode. We certainly have the ability to add security features that can be integrated into existing systems, right? It's the same complexity that you have to be from an attacker standpoint. Use that to be a defender, to be able to upgrade your legacy systems.
Okay, a quick education and training question. I have an individual asking, what would you, as a panelist, recommend as the best way to gain the knowledge and skills required to contribute to the cyber industry, particularly training or activities prior to formal education? And that Cyber Patriot, for example, in general, is probably something.
Yeah, there are some good cyber certifications that you can get that are outside of the degree programs in colleges. There's the 8570 certification that is one that's being required by many government and industry in order to be in the cyber field. I would recommend SANS is a organization that has a tremendous number of training programs that are outside of the university systems. So I would recommend looking throughout those.
Quite frankly, I think the training is absolutely weak, and industry is finding that we have to train them ourselves when we get them. We take the talent, and it's not just computer science folks. I mean, new skills are being required. This combination of communications and intel analytics. So we're looking at bringing people in, and we spend a considerable amount of funds with our own internal corporate universities, bringing these folks up to speed in skills that we believe are necessary to provide back to our customer.
Good point. Dewey?
I'd just say mobile environments are critically important. Android development, iOS 5 on Apple. I think that foundationally we believe that the future is there, and so to be literate at least in the development environments and Java for Android and so on are really important prerequisites before you can even get to the point where you're looking at defense.
Well, I think a little unorthodox about some of these things. Take your favorite video game, find how to break it so that you always win. If you can do that, you probably can play in this world.
Okay, I got a final question for you, kind of an open-ended one. What do you see as a key role for industry support to government cyber operations? Cyber products, cyber services, or another activity?
I think it's a balance. I think we find it a little easier to sell cyber products into government, but we talked about it. If you're going to be able to handle that agility of constantly addressing the new threat and the new different tactics that they take, it's really important that you also have that services component that is offered in here to constantly keep those systems at the level they need to be.
John?
I really do agree. I think it's both. And you'll look at the companies up here all invest millions and millions of dollars in research and IRAD for our customers, and that some of that's focused around how we better deliver services, some of that's focused around better understanding problems, and then a lot of that's focused around products and solutions. So I really think it's a full spectrum, and I think it wouldn't make sense to focus the industrial base of the country exclusively on one or the other.
Charlie?
I think first in my mind is make sure you understand the customer's mission before you try to offer them solutions. And then it may be a combination. But in my view, it always comes back to the talent you have and the processes you're using long before the tool selection. That's the way we look at it in industry. That's where we spend our time and effort, talent, and process, and then worry about the technical solution. I think maybe the biggest help industry can provide our customers is helping them shift a little bit in how they look at cybersecurity. And I think the discussion going on today about an intel-driven defense and the processes used to do that, we've advanced this seven-step kill chain process. I think that's an important discussion to have, and I think what industry will do is bring the customer to a leading edge in terms of changing their ConOps and their processes long before we look at offering them tools. Thanks.
Well, I mean, I think that as a good corporate citizen, we should all be focused on being the eyes and the ears of the government organizations that we support and do business with. That the bigger the company, chances are the better reach you have with respect to insight into what's going on in your network. So the next generation DIB, enduring security framework, as it evolves, I think that it's very, very important that we use our resources to help provide better capabilities in this area.
Yeah, I'd like to. I think industry and government needs to be a partnership. As Charlie said, we need to understand your mission. We need you to tell us what you need, so we can help you better. We have I think all of the industrial partners here, we have a smart and willing workforce. Let me flip back to innovation for a minute. We all spend money on innovation, not just technology innovation, but we're looking at process innovation, innovation in efficiencies, And if we work as a partnership, we can bring those and help each other bring those to both sides of the equation. And so I think that communication that we have back and forth is of utmost importance, both for industry to make sure we're doing what you need, and for the government to make sure that industry is putting their money into the places that are important to you.
Well, it's certainly been a privilege to be up here as moderator for this industry panel. Hopefully the thoughts, the answers to your questions that you heard here further testifies that we're all cyber warriors in this effort. There's a lot of talent, a lot of capability in industry, and we look forward to working with government and our customers to move our national security and other capabilities in our economy forward. Special thanks to Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, and Raytheon for participating, and certainly for your sponsorship here. And thanks so much for the opportunity to moderate. I'd like to offer a very sincere and big hand for our panelists. Thanks so much.
We'd like to thank Ed and the entire panel for sharing their thoughts about cyberspace and industry's roles. At this time, we will move to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Major General Suzanne Vautrinot, Commander of the 24th Air Force and Commander Air Force Network Operations. She is responsible for the Air Force's component-numbered Air Force, providing combatant commanders with trained and cyber-ready forces. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me extend a warm welcome to General Vautrinot.
There's music, and there's folks in the audience. I have all my friends here with me, and it is a pleasure and a privilege to be able to talk to you about what we're doing in the mission operations in cyber. And I'm particularly fortunate because when General Basley got up this morning, he talked about where we're going, what we're doing in this mission area. And that allows me to talk about some of the specifics about how we think about this, how we think about the strategy. He also mentioned that we have any number of military leaders, some now retired with industry, and some that continue to be our mentors. And that team is extended in this audience today. And so if you haven't looked around, we have the other eyes, other than the industry partners that I am privileged to work with every day. We also have the intellectual capital of our young folks. The Civil Air Patrol team that won the military portion of the competition for Cyber Patriot, the high school competition, are here in the audience with you today. Guys, would you stand up for just a second and wave? We have our international partners, and you can see the ones, particularly our Canadian and our German friends, wearing their uniforms, but it's not just the folks that are the military representatives. They have any number of civilian and industry representatives with them today as well. So, gentlemen, ladies, if you will stand as well so we can recognize how many of our international partners are here. I I won't make everyone stand because sometimes my intelligence community friends, my interagency friends, and certainly my law enforcement friends don't like to be recognized at DEF CON. It's a little harder to find the Fed in those cases. But they are partners, and that's what's so important about what we're going to talk about. Next slide, please. When we do Air Force cyber operations, it's no longer about who's in charge and who's going to do which pieces. It's about a unity of effort that comes all the way from my leadership down through. And when you look at the goals and the focus that we have with General Shelton and General Basla for what are we about, what is our core competency for the Air Force, and it is access and persistence and awareness for the next generation. So the mission, the priorities, my mission, which is inextricably linked to U.S. Cyber Command's mission and their support of Strategic Command. The only difference is you take out the Air Force and pretty much same mission set. So when you get down to where are we focusing our efforts in terms of priorities and where do we need your help as the eyes in our team, that's where we're going to focus. And that's what I wanted to explain a little bit about today in terms of where are we going from a strategic vision. Next. When we talk about cyber, we are talking about mission, a mission focus and a mission accomplishment. And my mission focus, just like in any other domain, whether it is ground, sea, air, or space, the same is true for cyber. We are responding to orders and guidance that support this nation in its fights around the globe, whether that's in humanitarian assistance, whether that is in national security, whether that is in defense of this nation here at home. It comes in the form from Cybercom of orders. And so when you look at the types of orders that we are given on the daily basis, that is the mission focus. And you'll look at the bottom of that, the piece that's been talked about with industry and in terms of General Basla's comments on how do we change our architecture and our infrastructure are the ones you see at the bottom. Great big numbers. And when you look at that many orders come in every single day, that means we need to think a little bit differently about that architecture and our mission assurance in how we move forward so that we can take a mission view and a singularity of those orders rather than treating each individual piece. In the same way, Air Force Space Command issues my strategy, my orders, through two very key documents, the Core Function Master Plan and as the lead integrator doing the priorities within the program objectives and within the budget distribution. Everything you see there on the top is my Air Force's cyber orders, and on the bottom is my 24th Air Force and AFNet Ops orders, focusing our effort and giving us that unity to move forward. And in moving forward, next slide. Next slide, please. That means we have to be organized and have the structure of command and control that is exactly right for this mission. So if you look a little bit at the bytes of authority there and that focus, or if you want to look at this just a little bit as maybe a chip off the old block, this is my environment. As we said at the beginning, as Ed Rios pointed out, we don't own the cyber environment in the Department of Defense. This is my organizational structure, very specifically. And if you aren't comfortable working in an environment where it is collaborative, where you work as a team, where you have to leverage other people's authorities and other people's capabilities, sometimes other people's responsibilities, then this probably is not the domain for you, because you don't get to own it and you don't get to put it in a nice, neat block diagram. And it is ever changing. And it is changing because industry changes. That is actually a wonderful thing, because as fast as this architecture and the software and the capabilities change, that means the adversary also has to catch up. So if you say stay stagnant, that allows your adversary to take advantage of their very keen knowledge of this system. The more you allow yourself to adapt and to represent industry and where industry and academic and the international community is going, the more advantage you have in defending this nation and in making this nation more effective in defense elsewhere. So this really is extraordinary, and it has to be applied in those mission orders you saw earlier, next slide, which means that when I am applying my mission orders from an Air Force's cyber standpoint, taking the core competencies of our Air Force and applying them to every one of those combatant commands around the globe. That means we do it with that central focus of how to make their missions more effective. And so when we talk full spectrum, I absolutely agree with Steve. It is offense, defense, and exploitation. And those things merge together. How do we provide those to the combatant command so that those missions are accomplished? And we do that through the face of, next slide, through the face of my subunified command, and that is Cyber Command, who is shifting those orders to me. So interfacing with every one of those combatant commands, prioritizing, and then describing how do we support them as a collective, not in individual chase the soccer ball types of venues, but in terms of how do we expand that enterprise and apply it to the defense of this nation. Next slide. But simultaneously, that means that my brethren in the Air Force need to be able to provide every single one of their missions to those same combatant commands. And they aren't just doing that in cyber. What they are doing is relying on the foundation of both space and cyber in order to conduct, in most cases, those air missions, those core competencies for our United States Air Force, or taking cyber and space forward in addition to those core competency options. When they do that, the foundational elements of cyber allow us to do global reach, global persistence, global awareness. And that means anything that they reach to their network for, we have to provide with resiliency, with absolute clarity so that they can move forward in their missions. But that carries that same interface back to them. They have to understand what those dependencies are. If they don't understand how they're relying upon cyber, or for that matter, how they're relying upon space, then it is almost impossible to provide that defense of their very key vulnerability assessments. Next slide. When I do this mission, we are doing that under the hat of 24th Air Force or providing the Air Force network operations, and that is Space Command's responsibility as the lead integrator for all those capabilities. For everyone that thought that it was somehow difficult that we had 3 hats, some days it is. You feel a little bit like Service 3. That would be the 3-headed dog at the gates of hell. But on other days, it's a recognition that everything you do in this environment facilitates both of those roles simultaneously. And so the way that we define our systems, the way that we acquire our systems, the way that we architect them to provide mission capability provides both of those instantiations simultaneously. It is not 2 different things. Next slide. So if we're going to do that, we need to do it from a perspective that is a strategy, and it is a strategy for an entire Air Force. Now, I've always wanted to classify this slide, and because I thought that maybe people would actually read it. This is a slide that was actually presented by General Shelton to the Corona Conference. This is our 4 stars for all of the Air Force not quite a year ago. And when it was presented, it was a discussion of where does our Air Force need to go in terms of moving forward in the cyber domain. And what we recognized is that when you have a top line and you recognize that top line is not going to grow, and everyone talked about the $1.2 billion efficiencies, that usually means not growing. So that steady top line says that for every dollar you spend as a taxpayer and for every dollar that we spend on your behalf in moving national security forward, there has to be a bang for the buck. There has to be some capability growth for that dollar. And in the way that we had structured ourselves in cyber, we were low and left. You never want to be low and left. That means I'm spending this much money to get this much capability. Now, that doesn't mean that we didn't have great capability and that wasn't developed by great folks. But in the same way, the Wright Flyer is no longer pertinent today, and probably not the SR-71 and not the P-51. The kinds of things that we built before we knew there was an adversary in a contested environment are not the kinds of systems we need in today's environment where it is absolutely contested and by an adversary that doesn't need much more than, as General Basler said, a keyboard and a network connection. So that means that when you are looking at your defense, you don't want to be in a reactive mode. You don't want to say, I'm just going to put up a firewall and hope they can't get through it, because remember, we're the Air Force. And for the Germans in the audience, remember, you went over the firewall. You flew past the line of demarcation, the line of defense. There is no more FLOT. So if we can do that with our technology, so can the adversary, and you recognize they're probably already inside, just as General Kroom said. So if we are being manpower intensive, if we have heterogeneous kludged systems that we tried to bring together just as you did in your homes, we are not being effective and efficient in the way that we manage our systems and come up that scale. In the same way, on the full spectrum side, offense, defense, exploitation. So this is where I get a little more offensive, like I wasn't enough already. On that side, we had niche and nascent capabilities, very interesting things that we could do, but we couldn't expand them to the entire nation and to all of the combatant commands that we need to respond to. Scale is important. And if you remember on that first chart, it's about capacity, capability, and collaboration. And that's what's going to get us up that chart. So what we're looking for is a way to come up, and every dollar spent by the CIFLI and every engagement that we have on capability, what we gauge it against is how far up this chart are we coming with that capability. And if it keeps me low and left because it's a new thing and it's not integrated, it's not homogeneous, then probably it's a negative, not a positive, to what the nation needs to move forward on. So this is a chart that I'd ask you to look at because there's going to be a test later, and I'm going to apply it. Next slide. So this is the challenge. Where am I coming from? What's in my DNA and the way that we started, and where do I need to go forward? So it is not a maintenance activity. It's not about counting the number of outages. It's about looking at the mission effectiveness and what kind of mission establishment do I need to do and how I architect these things together. Next slide. Defense is an extraordinary strategy. Roll the film.
One Mississippi. Joe Theismann, the Redskins quarterback, takes a snap and hands off to his running back. 2 Mississippi. It's a trick play, a flea flicker, and the running back tosses the ball back to the quarterback. 3 Mississippi. Up to now, the play's been defined by what the quarterback sees. It's about to be defined by what he doesn't. 4 Mississippi. Lawrence Taylor is the best defensive player in the NFL and has been from the time he stepped onto the field as a rookie. He will also change the game of football as we know it.
And we'll look at it with the reverse angle one more time, and I suggest your stomach is weak, you just don't watch. And we'll look at it with the reverse angle one more time, and I suggest your stomach is weak, you just don't watch.
Legendary quarterback Joe Theismann never played another down of football.
And I would like that our adversaries never play another down in cyber. And we can do that with the defense. Now, I didn't show that because I'm from Texas and that was the Redskins. I showed it because the defense is what made the difference. And they made the difference by understanding what was happening on the field of play and getting in front of it before the play could form. That is the beginnings of forensics. And when we look at forensics in a defensive standpoint, it is the game tapes. And you watch them over and over, and now you can set up the signatures that start to prevent the play. And more importantly, you can get to the next step of heuristics that says, I know what a play looks like when it's setting up, even if I've never seen that play before. That means you don't do one thing, one silver bullet in this environment. It means that you do defense in depth and you apply that knowledge across all the possibilities of how someone could take advantage of your architectures and your ability to use cyber to your advantage. And more importantly, use it to their disadvantage in the meantime because it's kind of fun. Next slide. What that means is you completely change your way of thinking about defense. And General Basler talked a little bit about the network architectures and network awareness piece of this when he talked about RPAs. So when I look at a remotely piloted aircraft, I just see a router flying in the sky. And that router has to touch 60 to 80 different network interfaces for every one of its missions flown. That's in order to both fly and to provide the data that it's working on. Now, who would design a system that has to touch 60 to 80 places in order to conduct its mission? We did. We did because we weren't worried about what the network assurance was. We were worried about the RPA mission. If you look at it from a cyber mission in accompaniment, in escort of that RPA mission, you would design it differently and you would build in protections, you would build in resiliency, and you would build in less touch points. That's what we mean by network architecture's network awareness, knowing what you're touching, which incidentally was not known, and oftentimes by our current systems that were built in a different time and place, understanding that laydown of what the network touches in order to complete its mission is an unknown for many of our mission areas. That's an area where the folks in this room can help. So let's talk about that just a little bit in terms of how do we think about our proactive defense and our methodologies. Next slide. It's about proactive defense in depth. And so when we talked about taking an AFNet migration, the Air Force network, which refers to, in this particular case, our unclassified networks and how many touch points they have, like that RPA, hundreds of different touch points to get to the internet, and worse yet, hundreds of different methodologies to bypass even those to come in directly. And so as we did this migration, we created a set of gateways for the Air Force beneath the 10 DoD gateways, and we censored them differently. Remember that play setup? Tutelage at the DoD gateways, the active sensor provides great capability, great signatures for those things that it knows. But when I look at this diagram, I look first at what never touches any of us, because we already had the signature, we already had the awareness that that's a bad guy, and it just never got through the system. Millions of things never get through that system. But for the things that do, and unfortunately, if you have people that are using your network, you have to actually let them communicate. It's a terrible thing. You've got to let some things come through. And so as those bad things come through, the next thing that they're going to touch is the Air Force gateway. And I will tell you that a year ago, if we had had a piece of malware or a probe come through that gateway, never would have known it. What we would have seen was 1,000 different attacks against that lowest level, that green machine level at the bottom. And there would have been no correlation on those different attacks, and worse yet, we would have had to go physically clean every single one of them. Now what we see is a single entry at the gateway trying to go 1,000 different places, which means A, I can stop it at the gateway. B, they don't use my very precious bandwidth to have their malware flown through my system. And 3, I don't have to clean any of those 1,000 systems at the bottom. So from a defensive, proactive standpoint, I'm loving it. Now on the other side, where I like to get a little more offensive, now you can pass to the intelligence community who was trying to come through your gateway, what were the identifiers of that, so that in real time, law enforcement, intelligence community, whoever is going to take that action, has that data to work with, and you can watch where they go instead. Now that they can't come through you, which we stop in real time, and we notify the rest of the joint community so it doesn't come through the DoD gateway either, now you can watch where they go. You can watch that play setting up, and you can watch their priorities. So the defense in depth goes across that entire continuum that I showed you earlier. And what has the greatest contribution? Where should I be spending my very, very dear dollar? General Basler is going to ask me what's providing the greatest capability. And so if I have metrics, I can tell him which of those sensors contributed under which circumstances and which ones are the most important to me. It also tells me where it is the least likely that I will have additional game. And right now, my game is not at the boundary level. The only reason we do boundary level is because that's what we had to do. The bases were the boundary. If I don't define my enterprise at the boundary, if I define it at the gateway, I don't have to put anything at the boundary. That saves money, and it allows me to focus on an area where I can have the biggest bang for the buck, at the machine level, at the gateway level. So all of those decisions made as part of that coming up the strategy slide relative to the metrics and what you're looking at. Next slide. But that also means that what you have now, because you've automated other pieces, you can apply to a new mission set. And the first one, as previously mentioned, is hunting. What hunting means is you are understanding that network. Remember, I looked at the network architecture and I know what I've got. Now I'm moving within it. And if you're moving it within it, it's kind of like when Neo was having to learn about the network and what it looked like to others. Please roll the tape.
Is that the Matrix? Yeah.
Do you always look at it and code it?
Well, you have to. The image translators work for the construct program. But there's way too much information to decode the matrix. You get used to it. I don't even see the...
And our young people don't see it either. What they see is the environment that they are working in and what looks normal to that environment, what is appropriate to that environment, and what is moving in that network environment that is not appropriate. That's what an adversary looks like if you are within that network and you are moving through it. So this is not cloud activity. This is moving on the network and looking at the interactions. I don't want to read the mail. I want to watch the process by which it moves through the network, because those processes, those interactions are the first indicator that something is not as it should be. So where we used to have blue teams that admired the problems, they looked at the vulnerability and said, oh my goodness, we have a huge problem, we no longer do that. We took all of those blue teams, all the admiration of the problem, and we turned them into solvers of the problem. What is going on in my network that I'm responsible for, and what does that interaction look like? And if you can find the interaction that is inappropriate, the next step, next slide please, and roll the tape. You have now reached the point where the adversary is moving with you, and recognizing that that adversary can be blocked prior to when they know they're going to throw their punch. Now, I may not be able to move outside my network. I may have to block within my insider environment, but at some point, understanding this level of interaction is what allows you to then reach forward into where that adversary is coming from. And that's where we want to be in the future, to be prepared for that level of interaction. And it's just the network. That is response action. And when we're doing that response action, we can do it on behalf of the FBI or the OSI, our law enforcement brethren, because they have the appropriate warrants and they have the Title 18 authority to move forward. We can do it on behalf of the intelligence community because they have the Title 50 authority, also Treasury Department. Or we can do it on behalf of Title 10, the military in military interaction. Because in cyber, all of us are affected equally, and so those that have the responsibility to thwart those attacks and protect their networks are the ones that should then be responsible for the appropriate response actions. Next slide. That brings us to some cyber examples, and I'm not going to spend too much time on these other than recognizing that whether it is physical infrastructure where you assess the vulnerability and close that to prevent critical failure, as we have done at Peterson and Schriever, or whether it's a network enterprise activity that you find a flaw because it is interfacing with the Air Force network, the classified side or the unclassified side, that forensics allows you to help close the flaw in a system that was developed before there was adversaries, or whether you have a touch from RPA. If anyone read Wired.com, the article was wrong, but knowing that the RPAs had a problem was right, and we're the ones that told them, and we're the ones that went and helped them fix that vulnerability that was coming into the system and then touching the SIPRnet. When you recognize that this is the kind of application of the expertise, now we have changed the dynamic and tried to get in front of those kinds of problems we see and allow their systems to operate more effectively. Next slide. So what that really means is that air and space and cyber are Air Force power. They are air power. We have changed the mindset, and we have changed the kinds of skills we apply, and now we have a cyber domain, which is combat power. Whether we are enabling the combat power of others, or whether we are an alternative to that combat power in a non-kinetic sense. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Ma'am, cyber threats and attackers are not hindered by bureaucracy. How is government and contractors overcoming their own processes?
So I don't consider myself hindered by bureaucracy, because I raised my right arm and I said, defend the nation and the Constitution. And our Constitution has protection of freedoms, personal freedoms, as well as privacy. So even though, for example, the Russians might not respect that privacy, they have a thing called SORM, which says for an internet service provider to operate under a Russian license, you actually have to provide the data back to the government. they consider that part of their national security. It is part of their psyche. Our psyche is protection of personal freedoms, protection of intellectual property, which some countries don't recognize, and at the same time, making sure that we protect national security. So I don't consider it a problem that we have to have all of those things together, and I don't think you should have to balance those things. I think all of those things need to move forward together. So what we need to do is get past the fact that we happen to get our lines of authority through different parts of the Constitution and the Code, and work together to overcome any seams that the divisions of those codes represent. Now, sometimes there is a policy change that would make covering those seams just a little easier, and I know that Congress is working on some of those. But really and truly, when I say 10,000 targets or 100 missions per, what would you put after that? If anyone didn't put per week, then you don't understand how much we're doing in cyber operations. And so I am not thwarted. It's merely a little more difficult a challenge to work around and accomplish that mission.
Ma'am, this question revolves around Title 10 and Title 50. With respect to cyber capabilities, how do you best balance, negotiate, and differentiate acquisition and or apportion employment of cyber capabilities between Title 10 and Title 50?
What you just described would be a quid pro quo. We don't do it that way. A capability is a capability regardless of which title you use it on behalf of. And so the question is, are you going to take advantage of that capability, whether it's in a defensive structure or an offensive structure, and what's the downside risk of doing so? Are you providing information about your capabilities that you might not want to provide? Or are you using a capability that you probably can only use once or twice because everything moves very quickly in cyber, and so it's not a resilient capability you might have to adjust in the future? So what you're doing is saying, what kinds of capabilities does my nation have, and under what circumstances do I want to use those capabilities? That's the balance. And so it's not either or, it's not a quid pro quo, it's all of us using all of those capabilities, and what is the priority of the nation as you're using them.
Ma'am, does the Air Force consider cyberspace network assets within the Air Force a weapons system? Specifically, is the AFSCN, the Satellite Network Control Network, a weapons system?
Okay, so you've asked two questions. Is it a weapon system? Absolutely. Is it a cyber weapon system? Right now it's a space weapon system, and so for conducting the business of the Air Force Satellite Control Network, it is making sure that you can provide the information to the satellites, that you can fly those network satellites, that you can do it with resiliency. It wasn't built as a cyber system. And so what we're having to do is retool and rethink about that in terms of what are the methods by which you would protect it. I have exactly the same issue with AOCs, with Aerospace Operations Centers, and how they were developed, and they weren't developed for a protection of their cyber and their network interfaces. So it is conducting a mission, an air mission, and it is part of that weapon system. How do you make sure that the way that it uses cyber is protected? And frankly, if you're using Windows 03 and expect yourself and can't update it, I'm pretty much thinking you're not very well protected. So the way that we design and the way that we update these systems, as well as the way we protect them, and we've actually started work to work that, not to make too long a point of the answer. When we do a vulnerability assessment now, we go do hunting teams, as we have done with the TACC at AMC supporting Transcom, and as we are doing with one of the AOCs, we literally get inside their weapon system to find out what are their critical elements in order to conduct their mission, and therefore what are the most critical elements to protect from a vulnerability standpoint, and then what's the methodology by which you protect it? Is it a different software adjustment? Is it an enclaving to protect the interface externally? All kinds of options once you understand what the most vulnerable pieces parts are. And that's what hunting is all about, is determining that for other weapon systems and the dependencies on cyber.
Ma'am, you mentioned that your org chart requires collaboration. As a commander, what is your perspective on the balance between need to know and right to share in order to maximize collaboration?
So I'm assuming that the question is relative to industry. And so if we are going to share something with industry, the question in a national security side of the house becomes, why do I know that this is how my adversary came in, or what kind of capability does it have? And in order to protect from that adversary, you don't necessarily need to know why I know. You just need to know what I know. and how to thwart it. And so if I provide the signatures, whether it's to industry or whether it's to other government agencies, that signature and that information is what's key to them, not why I know to build it that way. In the same way, from an industry standpoint, they have stakeholders and stockholders that very much care whether or not they have an adversary in their midst. It affects their business space. And so I don't need necessarily to know exactly what was compromised by that in that industry environment. I need to know the methodology by which it was compromised so that we can share the information on how to thwart it the next time or how to recognize it before it comes into the system. So sharing the mechanics and sharing the information about what and how is the protection. The how come I know is less important and really shouldn't be part of the equation, and that protects both sides.
Ma'am, as we move to a cloud enterprise, we are essentially deliberately defining the next cyber battlefield. What are the advantages and pitfalls with such an architectural shift?
Okay, so what you just asked me is everything in the cloud? And the answer is, of course not. And if you understand the cloud, even saying cloud is a little overgeneralizing because you have enclaves, you have private clouds, you have public clouds. It's not one thing. So certainly for an environment where you want to have large amounts of data and immediate access to integrate that data and draw from it, a cloud is a perfect environment. But remember when I described hunting operations and moving within your network? You're not moving within the cloud. You're actually moving within the network environment itself, which is not a cloud. And so as I move within that network, I need to move as the network moves, not where the data is stored. And so understanding that distinction, now you apply the appropriate piece of network that you're going to do for the mission and not just arbitrarily lump it into what is appropriate for pieces of your mission or for methods of protecting large amounts of data relative to your mission.
How does the Air Force architecture and defense in depth interoperate with other services? And when does the Air Force fold its network into the common DoD infrastructure described by General Basla as part of the Joint Information Environment?
Oh, well, let me answer the second part of the question first. That would be Air Force Space Command and the Air Force CIO's decision. I'd be happy to do whatever they direct me to do. That's why I have those orders. On the first part, we work with each other every single day. As a matter of fact, when we talk about that defense in depth, the Army and the Navy have spent considerable time with us looking at our methodology in the Air Force because they want to take the best pieces of that. They don't want our bad lessons learned. They only want our good lessons learned, and we're happy to provide them. In the same way, we all provide data about what we see, and each of us has different core competencies. So if each of us is looking at the problem a little differently, as we provide that information forward to the Joint Operations Center and to each other in an interaction that we have constantly on a MERC chat, very much like how they do rescue and special operations, that constant chat is a sharing of information about what we're seeing on the network in real time. And not only the joint environment, when I look at the environment that I'm working with, we have OSI, FBI, intelligence community all embedded with us as well as industry. And so that's being shared in real time in terms of what we're seeing and how we respond to it, and then how we share that with the Joint Operations Center, who shares it with the Defense Cyber Crime Center, who is working that Defense Industrial Base interface.
Two more, ma'am. From the planning perspective, would you discuss the similarities and differences between traditional and Cyber Command Center operations?
Yeah, let me, that's a great question. I'm glad I planted it, or not. Bring up slide number 7, if you will, back to that strategy. So there's two things we need to understand here, and the first one is about how we plan for a cyber environment. Remember earlier they were talking about industrial control systems and the fact that many of the industries rely on cyber? If they rely on cyber and they were all built in a global environment, then miraculously they were all kind of built the same way. So if you bring up, I think I have a backup on this. Yeah, I do. Bring up 23, if you will. So when you talk about industrial controls, just hit 23, enter, it should come up. I hope. Nope, the backups aren't there. At any rate, what it tells you is that a refinery in Saudi Arabia looks just like a refinery in Baton Rouge, and a rail yard in Germany looks just like a rail yard in, say, Missouri. They were all constructed in much the same manner. So if you understand that industrial control interface and dependency on network, then you understand both what is vulnerable to your adversary and how you are vulnerable to that adversary. and you crosswalk that information, and that is part of your planning, and that's the niche target that go back to slide 7. When we talk about O-Plan niche targets, it's a recognition that just like in other things that we are very good at in this Air Force for core competencies like command and control communications centers, we have niches in terms of the way those industry environments were developed, and we can apply that to both our defense and how we would thwart an adversary with that knowledge. And so there's a recognition that that's a very efficient way to look at the planning. The other piece about planning in a network environment is that it's not the same thing as a kinetic where you're looking at the end target. When you look at it in cyber, whether I'm trying to defend or whether I'm trying to take advantage of, I'm looking at what are the paths, the aim points that somebody would use in order to have that effect. And so in a cyber environment, because it's networked, you can have 15, 20, 30 different methodologies to come in. And so at any given time in your planning, you need to look at all of those. So if you were a Marine or an Army Ranger, you're going to look at branches and sequels. Think of that as the branches of sequel in your planning. In cyber, we have to do all of that up front. What are the 13 different methodologies that somebody could come after me? How do I protect each one of those? And what do they look like at any given time? That's the planning methodology that goes on, not the focus on the end target. And so that's fundamentally different when you look at the cyber environment. So both in terms of what you can do efficiently because it's the same, and what you do on the front end to be able to operate in cyber time. And so for those of you that I think we're about done, so for those of you that want to join me in cyber time, that would be 881,000 Mach. Feel free to catch up anytime.
Last question, General. Of all the challenges you're facing, is there one that stands out that industry could help with the most?
I think it's already been mentioned, but I will foot stomp it on behalf of what General Kroom said and what Steve said and what General Basla has said. If industry helps us develop things that are not with the mindset of that heterogeneous defense in depth, understanding what the architecture and the dependencies are, if we develop more things outside that rubric, then we continue the problem and we continue this disparity in how we protect our weapon systems and therefore our national defense. So that everything we can do that says, let's develop according to standards, that doesn't mean sameness. It means with standards and with understanding of the interaction. Once you understand that interaction, once you can put it into a mechanism, that defense in depth, now you can censor it, now you can automate that censoring, and now you can defend in a very resilient methodology. And so that's the one thing I would ask of industry is don't do things differently. Look at the methodology by which you can bring them together and help us censor and automate so we know what our vulnerabilities are and can build resiliency at that point. Thanks.
Thank you, General Vautrinot, for your insightful comments and for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us here today. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now adjourn for lunch and will begin in 20 minutes in the International Center.